I was really hesitant to make a video about this at first, because there are just so many good videos by people like Solar and Middle 8 and people like that. Like, there are just so many good videos on this, and the videos I try to make are videos about people that no one really knows about, or just stories that haven't been brought to light as well. And this one has been brought to light very well, but a lot of things I don't really see is just the general talking about the music. I feel a lot of people just stray away from the music and more towards the person. And so today I'm really just going to be covering the music. You see, he's gone from pretty hard rock with psychedelic elements to it. It's like psych pop and even just straight up pop at this point. He's had a pretty interesting music career, and so that's what I'm going to be going through today. His career has a really interesting evolution, but first, I need to talk about something. Now, I have another channel. Now, of course, I have many other channels, but this one is mostly just fun channel. Now, this is probably not going to cater to anyone who watches these videos, but I do have another channel that has like ATV content, outdoor content, me like riding mountain bikes and stuff and doing just generally stupid shit on ATVs and stuff. So if you want to go check that out, links in the description. I do this with my friends, so Now, let's get on to the video. Kevin Parker started making music when he was really young. His father being in a cover band really helped Kevin's fascination with music. There would constantly be vinyls around and there would constantly be instruments around him, so he just naturally started learning these instruments. He began making songs about the age of 12 and later just putting them on CDs and just giving them to his friends and such, just for songs that they could just jam out to, nothing that was meant to be released. Throughout his teen life, he would continue to make these demos or just generally songs just for fun, and he'd play in many bands. Like, the amount of bands he's been in is kind of funny. It's pretty funny how many bands he's been in. You can definitely tell that he definitely had a fascination with music. In 2005, so we've done a bit of a jump here. He started the band called DD Drums with a couple of his friends. He gained slight popularity in the area, but nothing that's really very interesting. They played at a couple different gigs and stuff, but yeah. Despite, Tame Impala, which we'll get on to later, this one actually was played by many different people. This one was, a conjoint project. Around this time, his father noticed where he was going with music, because at this time, he was working at a store part-time and then mostly just devoting all his time to music. So he'd basically just be scratching the surface when it comes to money. And so his father told him, hey, you might not want to be taking this route, but it's really not for the reason you think. You see, his father being a musician as well, he's done this before. He's played gigs and stuff. And he told him, if you start doing this as a career, it might lose the magic. Of course, this was wrong, as we can see where Kevin is today, but it's interesting to, hear that. Now, there are many demos of Kevin out there, of his solo work and also some of his, work with other people. I'm going to play a couple of these songs right now. I'm going to play the early song I can find that is not copyrighted. I'll say the actual real first song I can find from him, and then the song that I can actually play, because a lot of these early demos have been copyrighted by Modular. No hate towards them, I completely understand, trying to have the rights to this music and such, but, copyright's just an interesting thing. During these times in bands, he'd be recording these home sessions completely played by him, and he'd just dump them on MySpace. Now, if you know anything about like late 2000s music, and even just 2000 music in general, MySpace will come up a lot. There's gonna be, mentions of, what's that one? It's that thing that Shane Morris did, Travis's old manager. But a lot of these music sites would just, you just dump your music on there and just hope that your music gets, out to a bigger stage. Soulja Boy really kind of pushed that, but, currently Kevin was just doing this stuff for fun. Eventually, a lot of these tracks gained a lot of recognition from fans who were fans of, DD Drums and all these other different bands that he was in. And that eventually gained the attention of Modular Records, which is an independent record label in Australia. And so the story goes is that he was on the way to a college exam, and he gets a call as he's driving, and it's Modular saying, "Hey, we want to have a meeting with you, we might want to sign you." And he stopped the car, turned around, and never showed up to college again. I think that's a little funny of a story. As I mentioned, he's been in a lot of bands. At one time, he was playing with his then girlfriend to make a dream pop, psych pop type album. And the band was called Melody's Echo Chamber. Now, in 2007 is around when Tame Impala came to fruition. This was a solo project for Kevin to work on. Now, this is before the Modular signing. This was a little bit before, so sorry if that's out of order. He made many songs and just dumped them on the SoundCloud, as I said. And eventually, again, he gained the attention of Modular Records. And so when he got signed with them, they asked, "Hey, could you release an EP?" Because that's usually what most people do when they get signed. So he handpicked a couple of these songs, quickly mixed them and finished them, and sent them off to Modular. Now, a lot of these recordings are like old. Like, some of these recordings can date back as early as 2001 is what I heard. There is a lot of work that Kevin worked on in the 2000s and even into the 1990s. Since he was studying astrology, he took great care in making this cover, and you can see his fascination with space in a lot of these different covers, which we'll go on to later. Now, speaking of covers, this is the cover. Now, again, I like this cover because it's astrology theme. I'm really big into space and stuff, and when it comes to studying stuff like that, so I definitely do like this cover. It has some good meaning to it, and all around it's just good cover. There's really not much to say about it other than, yeah, it's a pretty good cover. Now, this album is rock, and with a lot of psychedelic rock into it. It has a lot of inspiration from, Led Zeppelin and people like that. This is a really good EP. It's quite long considering it's an EP, because I feel nowadays we're used to these EPs being 4, 3, 2 songs long, which is interesting nowadays, and the run times are less than 10 minutes most of the time. But this one actually has a runtime of almost 30 minutes, which is really impressive considering how many songs are on here. So each song is 8 minutes long, which is impressive. A lot of the people could tell where the label was coming from when they signed him. The song structures are just so interesting, yet they're so refreshing. And the vocal performance and the writing was just amazing. This still is today a great listen, and it is on streaming services, so I recommend going and listening to it. Now that he'd been signed, the label was asking for an album. His label really offered him really anything to make this album. And to him, he had just been making music in his bedroom, so this was a bit of a change for him, being able to just really have a free roam of whatever he wanted to make this album. Because, he was generally just had a bunch of instruments in his room, just all of them broken. I can kind of relate with that. I have a guitar right here, quartz with it. I got 2 keyboards over there. You can't really see them, they're off camera, but it's just not it's not the best environment. So he requested to have a house by the ocean, and so that's what they did, and they sent him off about 3 hours away from Perth on the Indian Ocean is what I think it is. So it was a pretty interesting little place over there. And looking from the house, there was a lot of video of him in that house. You can just see it's just forest for miles, for hundreds of miles. You cannot see a thing. There's not one little sign of civilization out there. And so during these times, he made Innerspeaker. This project really swerved a lot from the sounds of the Tame Impala EP. It was much more psychedelic and had much more pop elements to it. This would also bring a start to what fans would know as his ever-changing style. Now, this album is incredible. I'm honestly speechless from it. There's really nothing I can say about it other than it's just amazing. I listened to it quite a bit. I just love the mixing on it, the sound on it. It's just absolutely incredible, and you can just kind of lay down and look at the ceiling for an hour while listening to it. For this album, he actually repurposed a song from the Tame Impala EP to finish it and mix it properly. The song is called Desire Be Desire Go. Great song, by the way. Though there were many issues with recording this album. Being in the middle of nowhere, there's no internet, there's no nothing, so all he really had was just power. And even power was more of a sketchy thing out there, considering it went out a lot. The house/cabin he was in was not built very well, so it wasn't really built for storms or anything. Now, being right beside the Indian Ocean, being right up against the ocean, storms were pretty, common. And so, of course, there would be water leaking from the ceiling, there would be power going out, and just generally a lot of audio issues and electricity, and not the best experience, let's just say that. And also, the house was almost blowing over, the house was just falling apart, basically. And also, due to a faulty cable, there was a little buzz in a lot of the recordings, which luckily was fixed by a professional later in mixing, but still, it was just an add to the problems. Kevin was alone most of the time in making this album. Occasionally, his fellow band members and also best friends, who were the band members, of course, came to help him work on the album or just have some company over there. And also, the mixing and mastering engineer came in to, fix a lot of the buzzing and stuff. This was also the time when the biggest storm of them all hit during the ironically recording of Jeremy's Storm, which I'm not sure if that's related or not, but once it was released, it was a big hit among critics and fans alike, which is interesting to say nowadays. Usually it's the fans who are liking the critics that don't, and the critics that like and the fans don't, but no, everyone liked this album. It was named Album of the Year by multiple fans, critics alike, and just generally everyone who listened to the album could just tell it was really special. And it really stepped far out of Australia, just hitting every single country in the world, and so he was really brought to a mainstream audience. He then would go on tour and just start performing and stuff. This was the start of Lonerism. Lonerism is Tame Impala's second album. This one jumps much more into pop, but it still does have its rock and psychedelic elements to it. The synths are much more prevalent on this record than Innerspeaker. He kind of steps back on the guitars and the electric things, even though they are technically still backbones of the track. There's a lot more space being filled by these synths. The mixing is incredible. I really do like the vocal mixing on this project. It's hard to explain. I just like it, It sounds very analog and stuff. This album was really recorded everywhere. I can't really give a set place of where it was recorded, because he was recording this while on tour for Innerspeaker and stuff. So the overall location of the album is not very set. Though the production did go into when he was, out of tour, and then it continued in his bedroom. The point behind this album was, well, actually it wasn't really meant to be an album. He started writing what he called these generic cheesy pop songs, and eventually he sat back and started reading some of this, and he also had made a couple songs just for fun and realized, hey, this isn't really that bad. Sometimes the best stuff just kind of happens on accident. The whole story behind this album is loneliness and being lost socially. It's a truly depressing album when you look into the lyrics in depth and the story it tells. It's a masterpiece for a reason though, because the emotion captured in the lyrics and a lot of the instrumentation is just beautiful. Some of my favorite parts of the album happen during the song Keep On Lying, and most of the song is actually instrumental, but it has a really deep meaning to it. There's talking in the background for most of the track. It's just slowly fading in and out, but you can never tell what anyone's really saying. You just make it a word or two. If you know the feeling, you understand why this track is very powerful. Love is a recurring theme in Kevin's work. Most of his earlier work, such as Innerspeaker, Tame Impala EP, and Lonerism, really is just mostly talking about the want for love and the failures of it. But in his next project, he would dive into love much more. Current has a much different feeling than Lonerism. It really strayed away from like the analog mixing, and the reason why is because Kevin mixed this completely by himself. It sounds very digital compared to his other projects. It's also because of the abundance of synths that are in here, and the ways that the guitars are mixed are very, digital. This album is a love story. Not really from beginning to end, but mostly beginning of the end. This album was mostly recorded in his home studio in Fremantle, Australia. This is by far his most popular project. He dived much more into pop and really gave rock kind of like a back end to it, but there are some songs that definitely have that rock influence, like "'Cause I'm a Man," which is, of course, an ironic song. Most people have heard some of the songs off this record. Maybe you heard it off a TikTok, maybe you heard it from a commercial, maybe you just heard playing in the background somewhere. This album was a huge commercial success compared to his other records. Though there were a couple issues when this album originally released. A band claimed that Kevin had sampled their drums on the song Eventually, but eventually the lawsuit kind of died out and it was never filed. Surprisingly, the album really only sold 50,000 first week. Now, that's impressive, but considering, the length that this album has gone since, it's kind of just an interesting little statistic. But it would sell much more in the upcoming weeks and years. But after this album, this would begin a huge hiatus for Tame Impala. Being busy with the success of the record and touring, he would not release another project for almost 6 years. During these times, he had fallen in love and got married, which was another reason for the big hiatus, which has apparently influenced a lot of his recent work. We'll talk about the Slow Rush in a little bit. He collaborated on many projects during these times. Some of the weirder collaborations he had was with hip-hop. Despite being, a rock psychedelic band with pop elements to it, it became one of, hip-hop's and a lot of big people in hip-hop's like favorite musicians. He ended up writing for people like Kanye West and collaborating on songs with people such as Travis Scott. Though we really don't know much about this record in general, Kevin was doing a lot during these times. He worked on music for most of the time during this gap, but most of the work from the Slow Rush really came in the 3 years before it released. Since Kevin is very secretive about his projects and songs, there's really not much to go over. Most of these videos are kind of based off of a lot of information. I'd already knew a lot about Tame Impala's story before, going into this, and a lot of the bands he had been in. I can't really find much though, because just generally a very secretive dude, which is of course completely fine. People have your privacy. But right as the pandemic started, he would release his latest work in February of 2020.
Put on both arms. One.
This album is much different than what he made in the past. He strayed much away from the themes of Innerspeaker, Lonerism, and Currents. This album embodies the theme of time. This album doesn't sound like anything he's made before. You can hear the evolution though, but it's a big departure from the rock aspects of his previous records, instead going for much more of a pop-influenced work. He dives into a lot of different vocal effects on here. You can hear a lot of it on the song One More Year, which is the opening track. He uses vocals like an instrument in a lot of these newer songs. Now, of course, he's done that before, but in songs like these, some of the vocals on the background are literally like backbones to the track. Despite the common misconception that this is a concept album, it is actually not a concept record. Even though it would be cool as one, Kevin has stated publicly that it's really not, but it does have an underlying story to it. This album also has the influence of his wife, talking much more about love in a much happier state. This album was mostly recorded in California. It's his so-called LA album, because most artists usually have those, and Kevin thought it'd just be a cool place to, record this music. Though location for recording an album or record doesn't usually matter most of the time, I find it brings a different sound because of the environment and usually the people that are surrounded by you during the times of making the music. I record what I see around me. Of course, it's different for everyone else though. Now, this is where his story ends. I have a feeling we won't have to wait too much longer for a new album, considering he says we won't have such a big gap as we did between Currents and The Slow Rush. I have a feeling he might have an album ready by the time that his tour ends. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. I really have no announcements for this end of the video I've had for the past 3 videos, but there's really nothing to say here other than, please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.